Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the silver cornucopia from the 74th Games, that gleaming metal horn in the middle of the bloodbath, every blade, every bow, every perfect little backpack sitting at just the right angle. None of that is random. The game makers decide which weapons are close to the careers, which are buried in the pile, which are just far enough away that you have to sprint and maybe die for them. It looks chaotic, but it's choreography. And here's the real question. If the capital can place every knife and landmine by design, if they can spin the arena, trigger fire, send mutts and flip the weather from drought to flood in seconds, how much of a victory is ever truly earned? When your favorite tribute stands on that cornucopia at the end, covered in blood and glory, did they actually win the games? Or did the capital just decide not to stop them? At face value, the story we love is the underdog miracle. Katniss outshoots the careers. Peter outsmarts the arena. Finnick is just so absurdly competent that of course he survives. We tell ourselves they beat the system, but there is a lot to uncover here, because the system could have crushed them at any moment. If Seneca can conjure fireballs on command, why not cook Katniss the second she wanders off script? If they can drop mutations with specific tribute's eyes, why not send one directly to Peter's hiding place and end the romance subplot before it starts? This is where we talk about those miracle wins that start to look suspicious when you remember who's holding the controls. Seneca's mid-game rule change in the 74th, allowing two victors from the same district, just happens to benefit Katniss and Peter. Then, when the love story has done its job, that rule is yanked back to force a tragic choice. Haymitch's force field trick in the second quarter quell is so humiliating to the capital that they redesigned the 75th specifically to punish victors. If they were that angry, why didn't they patch that kind of loophole decades earlier? And Finnick Odair, on paper, he's a prodigy from District 4. In practice, he becomes the capital's golden boy, turned into a walking promise of beauty, romance, and hope for the audience. He's marketable. He sells the games. Is it a coincidence that the arena let him live long enough to become the face they could exploit? Joanna, Beatty, all these victors who conveniently serve a narrative purpose, are they survivors or investments? But politically, they're a message. That part matters because sometimes the strongest message isn't killing a tribute, it's letting them live. So what happens when the best propaganda isn't the body count, but the victor they choose not to eliminate? In the next section, we're going to cover what it would actually mean if winning was just another capital decision, not a fair fight at all. Winning isn't freedom. Why rigged victories actually matter? If the capital can decide not to kill you, then what does winning even mean? Because once you remember they control every mutt, every feast, the question stops being who's strongest and becomes who did they decide to let walk out? Back in the early games, especially around the 10th, 11th, 20th, there is a lot to uncover here. Those arenas are messy, blunt instruments. No polished narratives, barely any technology, just kids thrown into a concrete zoo and told to tear each other apart. You get Lucy Gray's chaos, you get experimental mutts and failing infrastructure. It's brutal, but it's honest brutality. If you survive that, You really did outlast a slaughterhouse. By Katniss's era, the whole thing has been sanded down into a TV product. The fireballs that drive her toward the careers, the feast with the exact medicine Peter needs, the mutts that appear right when the game makers want to compress the cast. This is where we talk about narrative control. The violence is still there, but it's curated. It's a story, and stories need an ending the Capitol approves of. Here's the real question. Why does it matter if the Capitol lets someone win instead of them simply winning? At face value, a victor is a survivor, a symbol of resistance, proof that you can beat the system. But if the system is quietly choosing not to crush you, that part matters because your victory shifts from rebellion to collaboration. You stop being the exception that proves the Capitol can be beaten and start being the proof that the Capitol is merciful when you behave. And remember, victory is not the end of the games. Any victor will tell you the arena just changes shape. You're paraded through every district. You're interviewed until your trauma has a brand. In Finnick's case, you're prostituted to powerful Capitol clients because your charm is suddenly a national resource. Then the quarter quell comes along and says, actually, you're not even safe from the reaping. The promise was never freedom. It was a longer contract, so why would the Capitol ever let someone win on purpose? Control. If District 4 gets a golden boy in Finnick, you pacify an entire coastal workforce with the fantasy that their children can become adored celebrities instead of corpses. If a district cooperates, you reward them with a miracle victor. If a tribute is especially marketable, you don't just spare them, you invest in them. The relationship between arena and afterlife becomes a pipeline, from survivor to mentor to living advertisement for obedience. And emotionally, this is the knife twist. If wins are curated, then even Katniss and Peter's triumphs sit under a question mark. Was the rule change for two victors a slip or a test? Did the Capitol underestimate the hope their survival would spark, or was that hope supposed to stay small and controllable? Snow wants every victory tainted so that when you cheer, you're never sure if you're cheering for the district or for his strategy. So what happens when a tribute really does outplay the system and the Capitol has to decide whether to crush them or co-opt them? In the next section, we're going to cover specific games and victors where that decision line is painfully visible, and ask which wins were earned and which were allowed. You're not just fighting other kids, you're fighting a production team that can change the weather, turn the ground into a landmine, and spawn mutts on your exact coordinates. So here's the real question. If the Capitol can do all that in real time, how random can any winner really be? Our core claim is this. Snow doesn't usually sit down before the games and point to a name on a list and say, that one. The spectacle works better if the outcome feels organic. But the Capitol is constantly nudging. It doesn't pick a specific victor in advance, so much as it shapes the arena so that only acceptable winners make it to the end. Anyone too dangerous, too inspiring, or too uncontrollable? The arena suddenly becomes a lot less survivable. So what does letting someone win actually mean in this world? It's not a secret contract in a back room where Snow shakes your hand and promises you a crown. It's the quiet decisions. Which mutts are released and where? Which rule changes get announced? Which feasts are stocked with medicine you desperately need? At face value, those are just game-maker twists. But that part matters because each twist has a political direction. It's never just about ratings, it's about who gets removed and who gets room to maneuver. This is where we talk about those three categories. First, you have tributes who genuinely outplay the system. People who find exploits the Capitol didn't plan for, like Haymitch weaponizing the force field, or Beatty turning the arena's own power against it. Second, tributes the system quietly favors. Finnick, who whose beauty and charisma scream propaganda asset, or Peter, who's so good on camera he practically prints hope posters for free. Third, tributes the capital will never allow to live if it can help it. Anyone who can unite districts, expose the lie of the games, or make rebellion look possible. And that's our analytical lens for the rest of the video. We're going to cover each major victor in terms of political utility, propaganda value, and risk management. Snow isn't grading kills, he's grading narrative. Does this tribute sell the promise that the games are fair? Do they make their district more obedient or more volatile? Do they deepen the relationship between fear and hope, or do they snap it in half? There is a lot to uncover here, because once you watch through Snow's eyes, certain wins start to feel less miraculous and more permitted. Was Finnick groomed as the perfect capital darling? Was Johanna punished for refusing to play that role? Was Katniss ever truly meant to leave that arena alive? Or did the rule change around the berries back the capital into a corner? In the next section, we'll test this theory against specific games, Haymitch, Finnick, Johanna, Beatty, Katniss, Peter, and ask in each case whether their victory was earned in spite of the system or allowed because it served it. What we're about to unpack, from rule changes to rigged narratives, so to keep us from getting lost in pure conspiracy, let's map out where we're going. Because if you're going to accuse the capital of rigging outcomes, you need to know exactly how much power they actually have over the board. First, we're going to cover raw control. This is where we talk about the Gamemakers as near gods inside the arena. They control weather, food, mutts, force fields, even where fires start and stop. At face value, it looks random, chaotic, may the odds, and all that. But when you can turn off a water source or drop a feast right next to a favored tribute, you're not just observing the games, you're editing them in real time. The question is, how often do they quietly nudge versus outright decide? Once we've laid out that toolkit, we'll test it against specific games that look especially suspicious. We'll start with Haymitch's Quarter Quell, where one force field placement turns a drunk kid from District 12 into a victor and enrages the capital so much they design the next quell to punish him. Then we move to Finnick's win and ask why a beautiful, charismatic 16-year-old from a fishing district just happens to become the capital's favorite celebrity weapon. Was he simply that good? Or that marketable? From there, we'll zoom in on the 74th and 75th games as our clearest case studies in open manipulation. Rule change to allow two victors from the same district. Rule reversal when the berries come out. The clock arena built specifically to re-break existing victors. Here's the real question. When you see those moves together, do Katniss and Peter beat the system, or does the system keep shifting its rules until their survival serves a larger narrative the capital thinks it can control? After that, we're going to step back and ask why a chosen winner would ever be useful. This is where we talk about politics. Sometimes a particular victor can pacify a restless district by proving that even you can win. Sometimes the winner is a warning, a punishment, a reminder that rebellion will cost you your children. And sometimes, as with Finnick or Johanna, that part matters because the victor becomes a tool, paraded, prostituted, threatened, long after the arena dust settles. The win is just the opening contract. Then we'll go meta. We'll compare book versus movie choices and track which manipulations get highlighted on screen. Why do the films linger on Seneca's rule change but downplay Haymitch's arena details? Why do we see Snow watching broadcasts but not the quieter district-level fallout? There is a lot to uncover here about author intent versus studio priorities and what each version wants you to believe about fair victory. Finally, we'll end in speculation mode. We'll rank which victors were most likely allowed to win based on everything we've built, and then push beyond Katniss's limited point of view. How many rigged outcomes never made it into the story because the Capitol's interference was subtle enough to pass as chance? And once you start seeing those patterns, can you ever watch any Hunger Games the same way again? Welcome to the Arena Analysis, why this channel lives in Paynem's fine print. So if we're suddenly questioning every miracle win, what are we actually doing on this channel? This is where we talk about the parts of Panem that Suzanne Collins only sketches in the margins. We're not just replaying the highlight reel of the games, we're pausing on the rule scroll, zooming in on the arena schematics, and asking why the Capitol built the system this way in the first place. At face value, a victor is whoever walks out alive. But here's the real question: whose survival serves the story the Capitol wants to tell? On this channel, we live in that gap between what the cameras show and what the game makers are really optimizing for. We're going to cover the lore, the politics, the tiny throwaway lines about force fields and feast tables and unforeseen mutt attacks, and treat them as deliberate design choices. There is a lot to uncover here when you stop asking who was strongest and start asking who was useful. That part matters because Panem is a dictatorship first, an entertainment company second. So where does this specific video fit in? Think of it as the rigging episode. We're not doing a simple who would win in a fight breakdown between Katniss and, say, Finnick. We're asking who was allowed to win and for what reason. Why does Seneca Crane invent a mid-game rule change that just happens to benefit a star-crossed pair from a rebellious district? Why does the arena hand Beatty a perfect metal cornucopia and a convenient wire if the message is supposed to be that no one beats the system? If you're new here and you find yourself overthinking reapings, quarter quells, Snow's roses, or why Victor's village survives when the rest of District 12 burns, you're in the right place. We tend to treat Panem the way the Capitol treats its arenas. Every rock placement, every sponsored gift, every broadcast cut has a purpose. If you want more deep dives into how hope, fear, and architecture all work together as weapons, you might want to stick around. If you've been here for the earlier videos on Snow's A Little Hope speech, Seneca's execution, or Victor's village as a long-term control mechanism, this will feel familiar. We're building on that same idea. The games don't end when the cannon fires. But this breakdown is still self-contained, so you don't need a full playlist binge to follow the argument. Think of those other videos as extra sponsor gifts, not prerequisites. All right, back into the arena. Let's talk about how God mode the game makers actually are, and more importantly, where that power stops. If they can script mutts, weather, and sudden rule changes, why doesn't the Capitol just pick every winner outright? And what does it mean when they almost do? Game makers as gods. The real limits of fair in the Hunger Games. If you want to understand whether the Capitol ever lets a tribute win, you have to start here. The game makers are not referees. They're gods with a control panel. We're going to cover what that actually means moment to moment inside an arena. Because at face value, the games look chaotic. Kids running, alliances forming, accidents happening. But behind every accident is a room full of adults deciding the weather, the terrain, the food, the mutts, and even when the sky gets dark so the anthem can roll B-roll of your friends' dead faces. Weather is not weather, it's a dial. They can summon drought, so a thirsty tribute has to move toward a trap, or drop a sudden cold snap that only the best supplied careers can endure. Terrain isn't fixed either. Plates can rise, forests can burn. The ground can literally tilt you toward the cornucopia. Food and water don't just appear randomly. Every pond, every berry bush, every sponsor parachute is placed on purpose, with a reason and a target. This is where we talk about the 74th Games, because it's the cleanest case study of God mode in action. Katniss is hiding in the woods, not giving the capital a good show. Solution? Wall of fire. It doesn't just scare her. It drives multiple tributes inward at the same time, funneling them toward confrontation. Later, when she's tree-bound and stuck, the tracker-jacker nest just happens to be the perfect weapon hanging over her head. Nature? Or a preloaded Chekhov's mutt, waiting for the right camera angle. Then you get the feast at the cornucopia. On paper, it's fair. Everyone's medicine is up for grabs. But the timing, the layout, the exact distance each tribute has to run, all of that shapes who has a real shot. And at the end, those mutts don't just swarm randomly. They herd Katniss and Peter to the cornucopia, then focus on Cato last, stretching his death into a spectacle and giving Katniss the emotional beat the Capitol wants on screen. How do they pull this off in real time? Total surveillance, hidden cameras in every tree, microphones in the grass, hovercrafts ready to scoop up bodies or drop in mutts within minutes. In the control room, they're watching heart rates, heat signatures, listening for any hint of rebellion or unexpected advantage. If a tribute stumbles into a loophole, they can slam a force field down, flood a zone, or send a fog bank that melts skin. And that fog, that drought, those force fields, they're all sliders. Dial the poison up, and you punish a specific cluster of tributes. Dial it down, and you quietly spare someone the worst of it. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between random danger and targeted punishment. So here's the real question. If they can intervene at any second, then every time they don't is also a choice. Letting a victor crawl through a gap in the system isn't pure luck. It's the Capitol deciding, for the moment, to hold its fire, which means the next step is asking, when do they step back on purpose? And what story are they buying with that restraint? Rule changes, feasts, and accidents. When the game board tilts, so if every non-intervention is a choice, what about the moments where the rules themselves suddenly bend? When the arena doesn't just react to tributes, it rewrites the script mid-scene. This is where we talk about the 74th games and that infamous announcement, 2 victors allowed if they're from the same district. At face value, it's presented as a romantic twist, a gift to the star-crossed lovers of District 12. But here's the real question. Why that rule in that game for that pair? The Capitol has run this show for decades. They know exactly what story they're buying. By the time Seneca Crane pushes that button, Katniss and Peter aren't just tributes. They're a rating spike, a narrative the audience is emotionally invested in. The rule change doesn't open a door for everyone. It specifically rewards districts that can perform a relationship on command. That part matters because it turns survival into a genre choice. Are you a solo killer, or can you sell the promise of a tragic romance the Capitol can replay every victory tour? And notice how the rule is revoked again at the end. That whiplash is the point. The Capitol gets maximum drama either way. A double suicide threat that makes them look merciful when they back down, or a bloody lover's finale. We're going to cover how that backfire fuels rebellion later, but inside the arena, it reads as a targeted tilt. Katniss and Peter are given just enough structural hope to keep the cameras rolling. Feasts are another way the board leans. You don't randomly drop life-saving medicine or food in a neutral clearing. You place Clove, Cato, Thresh, and Katniss on a collision course, because you know exactly who needs what. Need Katniss out of commission? Put her burn ointment in the center. Want Rue's death avenged on screen? Time Thresh's appearance so he can crush Clove at the peak of tension. A feast is advertised as equal opportunity. In practice, it's targeted risk. The Capitol decides which tributes have to walk through gunfire to reach their next breath. Sponsors are sold as the one thing the Capitol can't control. Pure audience will. But who edits the broadcast? Who chooses whether you see Katniss singing to Rue or Marvel's earlier kills? By shaping screen time, reaction shots, and commentary, the game's team quietly steers who looks noble, who looks hopeless, and who looks worth investing in. They don't have to pick the victor's gifts directly. They just flood the audience with one narrative until the parachutes follow. And then there are the so-called accidents. A mutt pack arriving seconds after a favored tribute clears a choke point. A sudden hazard wiping out a rival who wandered just a little too far from their storyline. How many near misses are really the Capitol nudging the timeline so their preferred ending stays intact? So at what point does stacking the deck stop being entertainment and start becoming a quiet decision about who's allowed to live? And if the Capitol can do that once, how many other victors are standing on wins that were never entirely theirs to begin with? Could they just pick a winner? Why Snow doesn't go full puppet master, so if the Capitol can nudge a mutt here and a fireball there, why not just go all in? Why not decide, on day one, this tribute is our victor, and run the entire games as a scripted execution of everyone else? At face value, that sounds efficient. No surprises, no rogue Haymitch force field moments, no Katniss with her handful of berries. You pre-write the arena, you pre-write the alliances, you pre-write the Death Order, and the cameras simply follow the script. But here's the real question. What happens the second the districts realize there was never any chance for their children at all? This is where we talk about the illusion of fairness. The games are never fair, but they have to look potentially winnable. The reaping is random. The arena is deadly to everyone. Even the careers die sometimes. That part matters because it preserves a tiny, poisonous hope in every district family that maybe if their tribute is strong or clever or blessed by sponsors, they could make it out. If Snow turns the games into obvious theatre, that hope evaporates and terror turns into rage. And Snow knows that. He tells Seneca Crane that hope is stronger than fear, but only when it's contained. A fully scripted games doesn't contain hope. It exposes the whole thing as a rigged execution. Suddenly, the relationship between Capitol and District stops being cruel but lawful spectacle and becomes open slaughter with costumes. That's a much harder system to sell for 75 years. There's also the entertainment problem. Capitol citizens want blood, but they also want suspense. They want to believe they're watching real survival and real strategy, even as the weather flips on command and mutts appear on cue. If it ever felt too obviously prearranged, the games stop being sports and start being reruns. Who sponsors a tribute when the outcome is already printed on a cue card? So instead of one locked-in winner, the game makers work with what we could call acceptable outcome ranges. They don't need Phoenix specifically to win. They need a victor who's beautiful, charismatic, and easy to market. They don't need Katniss to die in the bloodbath. They just need any potential symbol to either break early or be co-opted into their narrative. Multiple tributes can fit the brief. Pattern interrupt for a second. Imagine the control room wall not with one face circled, but a cluster. Anyone from this group is fine. Anyone from that group is a problem. The arena is then tuned so that the fine tributes keep getting water, cover, and camera time, while the dangerous outliers quietly run out of options. And here's where there is a lot to uncover here. Who ends up in that acceptable pool? Why is Finnick turned into a Capitol darling, while Johanna becomes a tool of intimidation? Why are some victors paraded and others buried in trauma and addiction? To answer that, we have to step outside the arena and look directly at Snow's long game, his political goals, his fears, and how each past games refined his sense of which victors were useful and which were ticking bombs. From chaos to control, how the early games taught the Capitol to cheat smarter. And this is where we talk about how Snow learned to do that, because the capital didn't start out with elegant, surgically precise manipulation. It started with a mess. You go back to the 10th Hunger Games, and it barely even looks like the same event. No gleaming clock arena, no designer mutts on standby. The tributes are thrown into a crumbling stadium with rubble, cages, and almost no environmental control. At face value, that sounds even more brutal. But here's the real question. Brutal for who? For the tributes, or for the capital's message? When tributes die too fast from infection, starvation, or some random structural collapse, you don't get a story, you get static. The early games had long stretches where nothing happened on screen, or where children just hid until they wasted away. That part matters because the whole reason the games exist is to remind every district who's in charge, every single year, in high definition. Enter Coriolanus Snow as a student mentor in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. He's not president yet. He's broke, desperate, and staring at games that are so boring and chaotic they're practically sabotaging the capital's own propaganda. So what does he do? He starts adding narrative. Sponsors, bets, interviews. He pushes the idea that you don't just watch kids die, you follow a character. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of control. Snow realizes the real power isn't just in killing tributes, it's in choosing which deaths the audience cares about. When Lucy Gray sings, when the cameras linger on certain faces, you're watching the prototype of the modern marketable victor. Young, charismatic, someone the capital can sell back to the districts as both a threat and a promise. But the early games keep exposing flaws. Sometimes the arena kills half the field in a day. Sometimes the last survivor is someone the capital hates, too rebellious, too visibly traumatized, or from a district they don't want empowered. That's a political disaster. So the game makers start rethinking the arena itself. Why not design landscapes that naturally funnel tributes towards certain clashes? Why not control food, water, and weather so the right contenders get more chances to shine? Over time, the games become less a battlefield and more a narrative machine. You still can't script every moment, but you can nudge. You can make sure the pretty career with the tragic backstory gets camera angles and resources while the inconvenient tribute starves off screen. We're going to cover how that plays out with specific victors later, but the pattern is clear. The capital learns to engineer conditions that favor winners who are young, attractive, trainable, and at least plausibly loyal. So once Snow has decades of this under his belt, the question shifts. He's not just asking who will survive this arena, he's asking which survivor can I use? And that brings us to the sharper issue we need to tackle next. What kind of winner does Snow actually want walking out of that arena? And what happens when the arena gives him someone very different? Snow's ideal victor, beautiful, useful, and never truly free. Snow's problem is simple on paper and terrifying in practice. He needs winners, but not heroes. So here's the real question. What does Snow's ideal victor actually look like when you strip away the roses and the champagne? At face value, you might think the capital just wants strong fighters. The careers from Districts 1, 2, and 4 certainly sell that image. But strength is only useful if it bends. Snow's dream victor is charismatic enough to hold an audience, controllable enough to follow a script, and not openly rebellious in a way that could embarrass him on live television. Bonus points if they come from a district that needs pacifying or rewarding, so their win feels like a promise. Behave, and you too might be spared. This is where we talk about marketability, because the games aren't just punishment, they're programming. A politically convenient victor has to be easy to sell. Finnick Odair is the textbook example. He's young, beautiful, charming, and immediately turned into a capital sex symbol and celebrity. There is a lot to uncover here. His trident skills win the arena, but his face and persona win the talk shows, the parties, the whispered auctions. Snow runs behind the scenes. Finnick proves that if you can turn a victor into a product, you don't just control their body in the arena, you control their image forever. That part matters because the opposite type of winner is a nightmare. An openly defiant tribute doesn't just survive. They rewrite the story. Katniss becomes the clearest case. The berries turn her from scared girl to symbol, and Snow immediately understands the danger. A defiant victor gives the districts a new relationship to the games. They stop seeing them as inevitable and start seeing them as vulnerable. Suddenly, every act of resistance has a face. So how do you keep even a good victor from drifting into that territory over time? You give yourself leverage, family you can threaten, lovers you can dangle, secrets you can expose. Finnick is trapped by the people Snow can hurt. Johanna's family is slaughtered when she refuses to play along. Peter's hijacking is leverage turned into a weapon. Winning never means you're free, it just means the capital has more to lose if you misbehave, so they build more chains. From Snow's perspective, the safest victor checks multiple boxes. Charismatic, but not radical. Traumatized enough to be pliable. From a district that needs either hope or humiliation. With relatives, romances, or scandals that keep them on a leash. So we're going to cover a mental checklist and start applying it. When you line up Haymitch, Joanna, Beatty, Katniss, and Peter, how many of Snow's ideal traits do they actually hit? And how many turn out to be the kind of winner the capital never wanted at all? Because once you start scoring them, one victor in particular starts to look suspiciously convenient. When letting a victor win becomes a weapon, because once you start scoring them, one victor in particular starts to look suspiciously convenient. And that's where the real weapon shows up. A chosen victor is not just a survivor, they're a tool you can aim at an entire district. At face value, it looks generous. A starving coal town finally gets a win, the trains roll in with extra food, the cameras linger on cheering crowds. But here's the real question. What does that win quietly teach everybody watching? If District 12 can produce Katniss and Peter, then maybe you don't need rebellion. Maybe you just need patience. Obedience, keep your head down, keep sending children, and one day the games might smile on you too. That part matters because a rare victor in a hopeless district turns the arena into a twisted lottery of hope instead of a guaranteed execution. The capital doesn't have to solve poverty if it can convince you that poverty occasionally pays off. But the same victor can be a punishment in disguise. This is where we talk about mentoring. You win, and your reward is to sit in that capital viewing room every year while 2 more kids from your streets walk into the bloodbath. You train them, you advise them, you probably watch them die. Over and over. Haymitch is the clearest example. Decades of being forced to relive his own games through other people's children, and the capital keeps the camera on his drunken collapse as a warning. Then there's the parade factor. A troublesome district, you send its shiny victor back through on the victory tour, draped in silk, escorted by peacekeepers, repeating scripted lines about gratitude. The message is not subtle. We own your greatest success. We can drag them in front of you whenever we want. The quarterquell twist takes that logic and rips the mask off. Reaping from the existing pool of victors lets Snow claim a technicality. The rules demand it. His hands are tied. But there is a lot to uncover here. Those victors were the living proof that the games had an end point, that if you won once, you were safe. Destroy that promise, and you don't just hurt Katniss. You tell every district, every child, every mentor, there is no finish line. What if the capital sometimes lets a problematic tribute win on purpose, specifically because they're problematic? Someone charismatic, beloved, defiant in the right way. Let them live, build them up, then break them in public. Finnick's exploitation, Joanna's torture, Peter's hijacking, each one turns a former symbol of resistance into a living billboard for what happens when you step out of line. So which is worse? To die quickly in the arena, or to be chosen to live as the capital's favorite prisoner, forever trapped in a mansion that doubles as a cell? Hold that question, because next we need to look at how Victor's village itself is engineered to make that prison feel voluntary. Haymitch's force field, genius move, or capital oversight. And that's where Haymitch walks in as the capital's worst fine print problem. You're told the arena is God. The game makers control the weather, the mutts, the food, the terrain. But then you get the second quarter quell, and one drunk kid from District 12 reads the terms and conditions nobody else bothered to check. Quick recap. Haymitch's arena is a vast, scenic landscape. With edges, at the cliff boundary, there's a force field, invisible and absolute. Step off, you die. At face value, it's just a lethal border to keep the game pieces on the board. But when Haymitch throws something over and watches it bounce back, he realizes the force field doesn't just block, it reflects. That part matters because once you understand that mechanic, the whole arena flips. Suddenly, that cliff isn't a dead end, it's a weapon. Haymitch starts testing it, timing it, using it as cover. And in the final showdown, when his opponent sends a knife his way, he sidesteps, lets the force field do its thing, and the blade ricochets straight back into her. Clean kill, technical victory, the capital's own design turned against them. Here's the real question. Why did that design exist in the first place? A force field that annihilates tributes is one thing. A force field that bounces weapons with lethal accuracy is a deliberate choice. Someone in the game maker room signed off on extremely abusable physics as a core feature of the games. And once Haymitch exposes that flaw on live television, why not fix it midstream? The capital can summon firestorms for Katniss, flood entire zones, drop mutts from the sky. They could have changed the field's settings, triggered a rock slide, or sent mutts to drive Haymitch away from the cliff. Instead, they let the sequence play out and allowed him to win using their own tech. So we're going to cover the political context, because there is a lot to uncover here. Back then, District 12 had no victors. Zero. A single scrappy survivor from a poor coal district was a PR opportunity. Proof that anyone can win, that the games are fair, that there's hope even for the lowest district if you're clever enough. One traumatized boy in a future victor's village looked low risk and high reward. This is where we talk about miscalculation. The capital sees a manageable symbol. What they actually create is a mentor who will quietly teach future tributes how rigged the system really is. Their relationship with Haymitch curdles over years of defiance, drinking and refusal to play nice. And when the third quarter quell rolls around, they finally try to correct the error by targeting victors like Haymitch, proving they underestimated the long-term cost of letting one unwanted winner live. Hold on to that pattern, because next we need to ask whether other so-called miracles were really the same kind of controlled risk. Finnick Odair, the capital's golden boy, or Snow's favourite pawn. So if Haymitch is the capital's mistake they spent decades trying to fix, Finnick Odair is the opposite problem. He's the kind of victor you suspect they were terrified to lose. We're going to cover what we actually know about his games first, because at face value, Finnick looks like a standard career success story. He's from District 4, one of the original career districts, already trained, already dangerous. He volunteers at 14. That part matters because 14 should be a disadvantage in the arena, But for Finnick it becomes part of the myth, the breathtaking prodigy with a trident. Sponsors adore a narrative, and the Capitol hands him one. Canon tells us he gets a gift of the trident early on, plus nets and an absurd amount of sponsor attention. That isn't random. In an arena where weapons are scarce and water is central, the boy from the fishing district ends up with the exact tool that turns him into a killing machine. You can say, sure, that's just good sponsor strategy. But here's the real question. Why did the odds lean so neatly toward the tribute who already reads as Capitol friendly? Because once Finnick wins, the pattern is blatant. This is where we talk about his post-games reward. He's paraded, sexualized, sold. The Capitol doesn't just enjoy him, they invest in him as property. Snow coerces him into prostitution, trades his body for secrets, and keeps him constantly on display as a Capitol darling. Finnick isn't retired from the games. He's rebranded. The arena just changes from jungle to bedroom. From Snow's perspective, he's perfect, attractive, charismatic, effortlessly charming on camera. He gives the Capitol the fantasy it wants, a victor who appears grateful, playful, harmless. On top of that, he's from a coastal district that supplies fish and probably luxury seafood for Capitol tables. The relationship is mutually reinforcing. Protect the Golden Boy, keep District 4 compliant, and send a message to every other district that the games can turn you into royalty, as long as you're useful. So how much could they have tilted his original arena to make sure that asset survived? Imagine feast setups that force close combat, where a trident and speed dominate over long-range weapons. Imagine mutts or engineered tides that punish tributes who can't swim, while Finnick moves through water as safely as most people walk down a hallway. The Gamemakers control weather, terrain, food, and mutts in real time. They don't have to hand him the crown. They just have to make sure no one else gets a better shot. And even if the physical arena wasn't fully stacked, the edit absolutely could be. More screen time means more sponsors mean more gifts mean, in practice, more lives. So when you zoom out, Finnick's victory starts to look less like a miracle and more like the Capitol spotting the perfect poster boy and quietly refusing to lose their investment. But if they're willing to bend the games for someone they love, what happens when they start bending them for someone they fear? Johanna Mason, the victor who faked weakness and survived anyway. If Finnick is the Capitol's hand-picked prince, Johanna Mason is their clerical error. She's what happens when the system misreads its own data. You're told the game makers see everything, control everything. But here's the real question. What happens when someone survives not because they're chosen, but because they were underestimated until it was too late? Johanna's games are the opposite of a career highlight reel. She goes in from District 7, surrounded by tributes who swing axes for a living, and plays the one role the Capitol never expects from a lumber district. Helpless, she cries. She shakes. She clings to trees and looks terrified of her own shadow. At face value, she's there to die early and tragically, a background tribute to make the real stars look more impressive. And then the numbers start dropping. 1 bloodbath, 2 days, 3 days. Somehow, she's still alive. She's not racking up kills on camera, so the audience barely tracks her. That part matters because the Capitol's relationship with its victors is built on visibility. If you're not a spectacle, you're not a priority. So when only a handful of tributes remain, and Joanna suddenly stops sobbing and starts butchering people, it doesn't look scripted. It looks wrong. This is where we talk about subversion. The Capitol wants clean archetypes, glamorous careers, tragic underdogs, noble sacrifices. They do not want a girl who weaponizes their own expectations, hides her skill set, and then flips the board when no one's looking. Johanna doesn't give them a narrative. She gives them a jump scare. So how do the game makers react to that? Imagine the control room. By the time they realize she's a problem, she's also a fan favorite in the making, precisely because her heel turn is so shocking. Kill her off with an obvious mutt swarm now, and you risk the audience asking the wrong question: why did the arena suddenly decide to target the girl who just proved she could win? Could they have engineered an accident? Sure, but the games run on the promise of fairness, or at least the illusion of it. There is a lot to uncover here, because once viewers suspect the outcome is rigged against certain personalities, the whole control strategy wobbles. So Johanna becomes an unintended victor, not someone the Capitol chose, but someone they failed to eliminate in time without exposing the trick. And look at what happens after. Compare her to Finnick. Both beautiful, both lethal. Finnick is groomed, paraded, used as a weapon and a reward. Johanna is punished. She's stripped, tortured and thrown back into the arena in the later Quell, specifically because her defiance never fit the script. So if Finnick shows us the Capitol's favorite kind of controlled victory, Johanna shows us their nightmare. A winner they didn't mean to have. But what about a victor who turns that unintended status into open rebellion in front of the whole country in real time? BT, Wirus, and the smart ones. When brains slip through the net. That brings us to the quiet revolutionaries. The victors who don't swing axes or charm audiences with perfect smiles, but rewire the entire board while the Capitol is watching. This is where we talk about BT. On paper, BT's games shouldn't have been exciting. He's from District 3, he's physically weaker than most of the field, and he's not exactly Finnick-level camera candy. At face value, you don't bet on him. But in his year, he earns the nickname Volts for a reason. He studies the arena, maps the patterns of the force field and power grid, and starts turning the Capitol's own systems into weapons. You're not watching a sword fight, you're watching a man debug a death trap. He rigs electrified snares, reworks landmines, and sets up traps that drop stronger tributes before they even know he's there. It's the same basic principle as Haymitch's force field trick, but where Haymitch uses one glitch as a final move, BT turns the whole arena into a circuit. The game makers built the environment to control him. He uses that environment to erase his competition. So here's the real question. Why did the Capitol let that happen? If they can send mutts on command, change the weather, or drop a tree on someone, they could have shut down his power sources the moment he became a threat. The reason they don't tells us something about how they see him. Brainy tributes from technical districts don't read as dangerous in the same way a career with a trident does. They're not flashy, they don't make for easy hero edits. But there is a lot to uncover here, because those quiet wins are some of the most narratively satisfying for the audience. You get the underdog story, the frail tribute who outsmarts the brutes, the promise that the games reward ingenuity, not just brute force. That part matters because it feeds the Capitol's favorite myth: anyone can win, if they just try hard enough. Even someone from a factory floor, and once BT is a victor, suddenly the relationship flips. The same Capitol that underestimated him now needs him. We're going to cover Victor's village as a gilded cage, but BT's cage is also a lab. He designs weapons, refines technology, and becomes indispensable to the very system that tried to kill him. Snow doesn't put him on a Finnick-style tour. He plugs him into the Capitol's nervous system, which raises another question. Was BT's win effectively allowed because no one in power fully understood what a brilliant, politically aware victor could become? They thought they were getting a useful engineer with a tragic backstory. What they actually created was the man who would later turn a lightning bolt into a live broadcast of rebellion. BT proves the game sometimes produce victors the Capitol didn't intend. And once those victors exist, Snow has only two options: weaponize them or destroy them. With BT, he tries the first. With others, he leans hard into the second. So what happens when a tribute is both underestimated and already famous? When the Capitol's chosen poster child starts slipping off the script in real time? Miracle lovers or calculated ratings boost? Katniss is already famous before the arena ever boots up. The girl with the bread, the volunteer from the starvation district. Add in Peter's rooftop confession, and suddenly the Capitol doesn't just have tributes. It has a story. This is where we talk about the star-crossed lovers narrative. At face value, it feels spontaneous, a sweet, tragic relationship blooming under impossible pressure. But whose cameras linger on every hand touch? Whose commentators frame every interaction as a romance? The games don't just show you Katniss and Peter, they tell you how to feel about them. The reason that part matters is simple. Once the audience is hooked on a love story, the game makers can start writing rules around it. Enter Seneca Crane and the 2 Victor rule change. Out of nowhere, mid-games, the announcement booms. 2 tributes from the same district can win. On paper, it's a gesture of hope, a rare mercy. But here's the real question. Why that rule, in that moment, benefiting the most telegenic couple the arena has had in years? We're going to cover the mutts and the berries, but this is the turning point where survival and show business fuse into one thing. Because once you promise the districts that a pair can go home together, you create a new kind of tension. Will love win? Will one betray the other? The Capitol isn't just watching for blood anymore. They're watching for a kiss, for a sacrifice, for a choice. Seneca uses Katniss and Peter as a ratings engine. The cave scenes, the kisses for sponsors, the medicine that literally drops from the sky when she performs affection on cue. The relationship becomes a vending machine. Insert romance, receive parachute. Then he escalates. The feast at the cornucopia is pure manipulation. Every remaining tribute suddenly needs something only the Capitol can provide. For Katniss, it's Peter's medicine. Why force that? Because the audience wants to see whether she chooses safety or love. She has to run into a death trap so the show can answer a question it invented. And the finale, there is a lot to uncover here. The Mutt attack on Cato doesn't just happen. The timing is surgical. They wait until all 3 tributes are on the cornucopia, then unleash mutts that specifically torment Cato, driving him up into a position where Katniss and Peter have the high ground and a clear winnable confrontation. No chaotic 3-way battle in the dark. A staged last stand with the doomed career as monster and the lovers as righteous survivors. But when they pull out the berries, the narrative flips. Suddenly, it's not love conquers all, it's 2 tributes openly threatening to rob the Capitol of a victor. The same double victor rule that made for great television now reads as defiance. So they reverse it in a panic. One of you can still live. Please stop rewriting the script. Katniss and Peter are, in a sense, allowed to win, right up until their victory stops selling hope and starts selling rebellion. And the real problem for Snow is that once a district sees that happen once, what's to stop another tribute from trying it again? When the arena fights back, the 75th quell, as a cleanup operation, so when Snow can't stop a stunt in the arena, what does he do next time? He changes who's allowed to step into it at all. The 3rd quarter quell rule sounds ceremonial at face value. On the 75th anniversary, the tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors. You've heard the explanation. It's framed as honoring the games, reminding the districts that even their champions belong to the Capitol. But here's the real question. Why reach backward into a supposedly finished story unless you're trying to edit the ending? This is where we talk about damage control. By the time we hit the 75th, The list of victors is messy from the capital's point of view. You have Katniss, the girl on fire who turned a double suicide into a national question mark. You have Haymitch, whose force field trick in the second quarter quell exposed a blind spot in the arena itself. Finnick, weaponized beauty from District 4, who knows exactly which clients the capital would prefer you never name. Johanna, who strips in an elevator and strips the veneer off capital etiquette at the same time. Beatty, a literal engineer of systems. There is a lot to uncover here, but the pattern is obvious. These are not safe mascots. So Snow wraps a purge in pretty stationary. He doesn't say, "We regret letting these people live." He says, "The third quell calls for a special reaping." Tradition becomes the excuse that lets him aim a loaded arena at a very specific demographic. Victors who have outlived their propaganda value and turned into symbols of resistance. Or at least of questioning. That part matters because it shows the games aren't just about who dies this year, they're about cleaning up who survived last year. Notice how many problems he tries to solve at once. Katniss, the spark in District 12. Peter, the boy who can turn any interview into a plea for empathy. Finnick, whose relationship with capital elites is a time bomb. Johanna, who openly hates the capital on camera. Beatty and Wyres, whose minds can literally rewire the arena's promise of control. When you line them up on one viewing screen, the 75th quell stops reading as a celebration and starts reading as a mass recall of defective products. And it retroactively reframes their original wins. Haymitch's cleverness? A mistake? Finnick's marketable charm? A short-term asset that aged into a liability? Katniss and Peter's star-crossed act? A gamble that paid off in ratings and then tanked in stability. The capital didn't suddenly become crueler. It just stopped pretending those earlier exceptions were sustainable. Here's the quiet horror. Even when a tribute beats the arena isn't done. If Snow can't stop a victory in the moment, he can always design a future games that calls that victor back in. Winning doesn't erase you from the capital's board, it pins you there. So the question hanging over every later tribute is brutal. Are you fighting to survive once, or to survive the cleanup operation you can't see yet? District 12. The district that wasn't supposed to have winners, and that brings us to the district that was never supposed to matter on the board at all. District 12, if you're the capital, 12 is perfect background noise. It's the poorest district, shoved out on the edge of Panem, where coal dust and hunger do most of the disciplining for you. Kids there don't train for the games. They train to not starve. So when the reaping happens, you're not seeing polished volunteers, you're seeing underfed, undertrained teenagers who usually die in the bloodbath before the cameras even learn their names. At face value, that's efficient. Why invest attention in a district that almost never produces a threat? For decades, 12's relationship to the games is simple. They send bodies, the arena eats them, the story moves on. No fan favorites, no legends, no incentive for the capital to interfere because the outcome is reliably boring and brutal. And here's the real question. What happens when a place that's built to lose suddenly wins? Before Haymitch, District 12 has no known victors. 0. In a system that runs on probability, that makes any win from 12 not just statistically rare, but symbolically explosive for the people back home. One victor there doesn't mean we're contenders now. It means, for the first time, the impossible happened. From Snow's perspective, that part matters because a single anomaly can be useful. Let one scrawny coal miner's kid beat the odds, and you get a neat little story. The games are fair. Anyone can win. Even the poorest district has hope. We're going to cover how hope is weaponized later, but the key here is that a lone 12 victor doesn't threaten the power structure. Not yet. It decorates it, So when Haymitch pulls off the force field trick in the second quarter quell, the capital is enraged, but also contained. He's one man. They can punish him without rewriting the whole promise of the games. They drown him in alcohol, trauma, and surveillance. To the capital audience, he's a cautionary tale. To District 12, he's proof the system can technically be beaten. But look what it turns you into. Now contrast that with Katniss. This is where we talk about miscalculation. Haymitch is a drunk, broken victor the capital can parade as damaged goods. Katniss is a young woman who volunteers, outwits the arena, and accidentally becomes a symbol. Same district, completely different narrative risk. The capital thinks it's managing another anomaly. Instead, it's feeding the Mockingjay. There is a lot to uncover here, because the capital clearly underestimates how District 12 processes those wins. One shattered man might be written off. 2 victors in quick succession, plus Peter, plus a public double suicide threat. Suddenly 12 isn't background noise. It's the origin story of open defiance. So the reason District 12 matters is simple. The capital thought it was allowing safe miracles from a harmless district. What it actually did was plant the seeds for the one story it could never fully control. A rebellion born in the place that was never supposed to have winners at all. And if 12 can do that, what does that suggest about every other harmless district the capital's been ignoring? Career districts. When the system works exactly as designed, so if District 12 was the miracle the capital never meant to happen, what about the districts where the miracles are built in from day one? Because this is where we talk about the career districts. Districts 1, 2, and 4 are the system working exactly as designed. You don't wait to be reaped there. You volunteer. You train from childhood in so-called academies. You study past games. At face value, it looks almost heroic. These kids are prepared, their families are proud, their district cheers when their name is called. But here's the real question. Why would a place that watched children die on TV decide that volunteering is an honor? The answer is culture, engineered from the top down. Snow needs at least some districts to believe the games are a legitimate path to glory, not just a punishment. Career tributes are the propaganda proof of concept. They grow up hearing the promise that if you win, you're rich, immune from the reaping, your whole district gets extra food and celebrations. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters because it flips the emotional script. In 12, the games are a horror. In 2, they're a sport you can win if you're strong enough. And when that's your starting point, you don't just get tributes, you get loyal victors. Think of Cato, Clove, Marvel, Glimmer, all moving through the arena like they're in an elite tournament. Or Finnick Odair, the capital's golden boy from 4, turned into a celebrity product the second he survives. These victors don't just stay alive, they reinforce the relationship Snow wants. The capital as talent scout, the arena as stage, the victor as proof that the system is fair, if you're worthy. So the careers get privileges that don't show up on the rule sheet. Real training centers instead of illegal hunting in the woods. Mentors with actual resources, not a drunk who's given up. District cultures that throw parades when someone volunteers and treat the games as an exciting season, the way you'd follow a sport, rather than a yearly death sentence. When you grow up watching your own victors come home to wealth and status, it's much easier to believe the games are an opportunity instead of a rigged execution. And here's where the rigging question gets interesting. In a career-heavy year, the capital doesn't have to cheat as aggressively. The arena can be brutal, the mutts can be vicious, and odds are the pack of hand-raised killers from 1, 2, or 4 will carve their way to the finale anyway. The entire pipeline naturally funnels toward politically safe winners who already admire the capital and owe their fame to it. But that doesn't mean the game makers are neutral. They can still nudge. Maybe the terrain favors close combat over stealth. Maybe the feast is placed where the careers already control the ground. Maybe one career gets the flattering edit, the tearful backstory, the sponsors primed to drop gifts at the perfect moment. You don't have to rig the victor outright if you can just tilt the board toward the kind of victor you already want. So if the career districts are giving Snow exactly what he needs, the real suspense becomes what happens when one of those perfectly trained tributes stops playing the role they were built for. Forgotten districts, hidden deals, what we don't see from 5, 6, 9, and 10. So if the careers were built to be predictable, here's the real question. What about the districts we barely see at all? The ones that don't get glossy capital coverage, but still have victors living in their own tiny victors' villages, tucked behind factories and fields. This is where we talk about the narrative blind spot. You experience the games through Katniss, and that means District 12, 11, maybe some 4. But Districts 5, 6, 9, 10, they're mostly background names at the Reaping. At face value, that makes them feel irrelevant. In universe, it's the opposite. The fact that you don't see their games or their victors is part of the control strategy. Why show you everything when mystery is more useful? If the capital broadcasts a mid-tier district's uprising, that spreads hope. If they quietly fix it with a conveniently inspiring victor, that's just another year of entertainment. So we use what little we do know. District 3 has BT and wireless, pure tech value. District 6 does transport, the veins of Panem. District 9 and 10 handle grain and livestock, the basic food supply everyone depends on. There is a lot to uncover here, because those industries are leverage. A victor from 3 can be paraded as the genius who loves the capital's technology. A victor from 6 can front a campaign about safe, reliable trains. A smiling victor from 9 or 10 can stand in a wheat field and promise that production is better than ever. So imagine the games the year after a minor strike in District 6. Not a full rebellion, just enough workers slowing the trains to make Snow nervous. What's the easiest fix? You don't send more peacekeepers on camera. That looks desperate. You tilt the arena so a charming, loyal-seeming transport tribute gets sponsors, avoids mutts, and miraculously wins. Suddenly, the district that was punished last year gets a parade, extra rations, a victor's village with lights on. Production goes back up. Because maybe the games work after all. Or think about 9 and 10. If harvest quotas drop, do you terrorize them on screen again, or do you let a farm kid win who cries on camera about feeding their siblings? That part matters because the relationship between food and hope is brutal. Hungry people are dangerous. Slightly less hungry people who believe next year might be better are manageable. And then there's the backroom layer. Local peacekeepers, mayors, merchant elites. Why wouldn't they quietly lobby? A promise to crack down harder on black markets in exchange for a tribute, getting a few extra sponsor gifts. A head peacekeeper who happens to know which mutt attacks will be pulled that day and nudges his favorite away from the danger zone. None of this has to be a formal memo from Snow. The games are flexible enough that a game maker can justify almost any storm, feast, or rule change as good television. The reason that's terrifying is you realize how many politically convenient victors we never hear about. For every Katniss who turns her victory into a question, there are probably dozens from 5, 6, 9, 10 who play their role, sell the story, and never rebel. And that raises a darker possibility. What happens when the capital needs not just a quiet victor, but a martyr? Why allow volunteers at all? The paradox at the heart of the games. And that raises a darker possibility. What happens when the capital needs not just a quiet victor, but a martyr? To answer that, We have to back up to something that seems almost boring because it's so baked into the games you stop questioning it. Volunteering. You're told it's just part of the system. Someone's name is drawn. Someone else can step forward. At face value, it feels almost merciful. A sibling can save a sibling. A trained career can spare a terrified 12-year-old. But here's the real question. Why does a regime built on absolute fear leave that door open at all? If Snow wanted maximum terror, he could ban volunteers tomorrow. Every reaping would become a pure lottery of helplessness. No escape clause, no heroic gesture. Just the reminder that the capital owns your children down to the last slip of paper. So why doesn't he do it? Why does District 1 still treat volunteering as a coronation, and District 2 run literal combat academies to prepare kids to raise their hands? Because volunteers solve a problem the capital never admits it has. Forced tributes are unpredictable. They cry, they freeze, they refuse to perform. Volunteers walk in already agreeing to the premise of the games. They've trained for it, dreamed about it, built their whole identity around the arena. That part matters because a volunteer doesn't just fight harder, they entertain better. You see it in the careers every year. Gloss and Kashmir posing on the chariots. Kato treating the bloodbath as a show. They're not just tributes, they're in-house talent. From the capital's perspective, why spend resources manufacturing drama when you can have districts 1, 2, and 4 do it for you for free? And that's the paradox. A system that's supposed to terrify you also invites you to aspire to it. We're going to cover how Victor's village dangles that promise of safety and wealth. But the first step is getting people to raise their hand in the first place. Volunteering turns the games from pure punishment into a twisted career path. It normalizes the spectacle. It makes the relationship between district and arena feel negotiable. It's also a perfect filter. Who volunteers? Ambitious kids, indoctrinated kids, children of peacekeepers, or district elites who already benefit from cooperating with the capital. In other words, the exact kind of person who, if they survive, is more likely to become a manageable victor instead of a Haymitch or a Johanna. Volunteers are self-selected loyalists. So why even allow volunteers? Because they give Snow better fighters, cleaner propaganda, and victors who are statistically less dangerous. But there is a lot to uncover here, because that still doesn't explain the deeper psychological move. Volunteering only works if there's something to reach for. Some distant, glittering maybe, that makes a child step forward. This is where we talk about Snow's favorite tool. Not fear. Hope. Hope versus fear. Snow's master equation for rigging survival. Snow actually tells you the whole strategy out loud. In that conversation with Seneca Crane, he doesn't talk about better arenas or higher kill counts. He leans in and says, almost gently, hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. At face value, it sounds almost philosophical. But here's the real question. What does that sentence mean for who's allowed to walk out of the arena alive? The Hunger Games are not designed as pure terror. If it were just yearly child sacrifice, no victors, no parades, no victors' village, the system would eventually snap. People can endure horror, but not pointless horror forever. So Snow builds this twisted promise into the structure. Yes, your kids might die, but someone will win. Someone from your district might end up in a mansion, with food, with power. That part matters because it turns the games from a static punishment into a rigged lottery you're forced to buy tickets for. We're going to cover how that lottery is managed, because the arena is not neutral. The Gamemakers control the weather, the mutts, the feast, the rulebook itself. When Seneca suddenly allows 2 victors from the same district in the 74th Games, that's not random compassion. That is the capital injecting a precise dose of hope into the bloodstream of Panem. A star-crossed lover's story sells better than a single traumatized winner bleeding out in a cave. So why allow certain tributes to win, even when they're inconvenient? The reason is Snow's master equation. Every tolerated victor is a calculation: will this win pacify a district more than it threatens the system? Finnick O'Dare is a perfect example. Young, beautiful, lethal, and instantly marketable. His victory gives District 4 a glamorous hero and gives the capital a new toy to parade and exploit. Controlled hope. He embodies the promise that if you play along, you might be rewarded, or at least your children might be turned into celebrities instead of corpses. Even Haymitch's infamous force field trick fits this pattern. The arena gave him a tool, and when he used it too well, the capital didn't erase his victory retroactively. They swallowed the embarrassment, turned him into a drunk cautionary tale, and saved their real revenge for the third quarter quell. The relationship between who wins and how they're treated afterward is the hope management tool. And then Katniss walks in and breaks the math. Her berry stunt doesn't just embarrass the capital, it turns the two from the same district rule change into a symbol that the rules themselves can be bent by a tribute. Her win gives too much hope. Suddenly, every district can point to a girl from 12, no career training, no sponsors at first, who forced the games to blink. The Mockingjay isn't born from her archery, it's born from the moment Snow realizes this is no longer controlled hope. This is contagious. So what happens when your entire system is built on carefully dosed hope and one victor turns it into a wildfire? That's where Snow's next move becomes even more brutal. When a victor becomes a message, executions, spectacle, and the ones who don't come home. Snow's next move isn't just more brutal, it's more selective, because once hope turns into wildfire, the capital doesn't just ask, who won? It starts asking, who gets to keep existing in the story? And here's the real question. When you look at the victors who don't come home, what pattern do you see? This is where we talk about the victors who are erased on purpose. We know about the obvious culling. After the quarter quell, the capital rounds up rebels and sympathizers, and several victors are executed. In Mockingjay, Peter, Johanna, and others are tortured in the capital. Some, like Annie, are held as bargaining chips. Others, we only hear their names in passing, and then nothing. There is a lot to uncover here, because those disappearances are doing political work. At face value, the games end when the cannon fires and a victor is crowned. But the capital's power means the real arena keeps going. They can decide a year later, 10 years later, that your victory was a mistake. That part matters because it turns survival into a conditional contract. You live as long as you're useful, or at least not dangerous. Think about the public executions versus the quiet removals. The victors killed after the failed rescue attempt, or the ones presumably shot when District 12 is bombed, are meant to be seen. It's the capital saying to every district, even your champions bleed. That's a spectacle. The same way a mutation is a spectacle. You're not just killing a person, you're killing the promise that a victor's status protects anyone. But then you have the other category, the ones who vanish into cells, laboratories, or medical facilities. Peter is hijacked instead of executed. Johanna is broken down with water torture and deprivation. Why not just kill them? Because a dead victor can become a martyr. A shattered victor can become a warning. The relationship between public killing and private erasure is strategic. One terrifies you, the other rewrites the narrative before it can inspire you. Pattern interrupt for a second. What does it mean that we never even learn the fates of every surviving victor? That blank space is world building. It implies a system where the capital can quietly revoke your visibility, your name, your impact, without ever firing a televised shot. So when we ask whether the capital let certain tributes win, we have to push it further. Winning is only phase 1. Phase 2 is being allowed to remain a symbol in the world. The line between allowed to win and allowed to live is razor thin, because the capital can retroactively decide your victory was actually a problem to be solved. And here's the real question the story never answers outright. How many victors technically won their games, but were never really meant to survive the story? How many Haymitches, Finnicks, or unnamed careers were quietly removed once their usefulness expired? Because once you see that, Victor's village stops looking permanent. It starts looking temporary, a holding pen the capital can clear out whenever the narrative demands it. So if even victory can be revoked, what does that do to the next generation of tributes watching from their districts? Behind the cameras, how edits, sponsors, and capital fandom pick favorites. So if the next generation grows up knowing victory can be revoked, here's the real question. Who's actually winning the games? The tributes in the arena or the editors in the control room? Because the Hunger Games aren't just a death match. They're a TV show. Every second you see in the districts has been chosen, trimmed, and framed by a capital production team whose real job isn't fairness, it's ratings, it's control. It's deciding whose suffering becomes entertainment and whose fear becomes a national event. At face value, you think the arena is the main battlefield. But this is where we talk about the second arena, the broadcast. If Caesar Flickerman never interviews you, if the cameras never linger on your face when you cry or when you make a stand, you barely exist to the audience. And if you barely exist to the audience, why would any sponsor spend precious money to send you food, medicine, or a knife when the parachutes start falling? There is a lot to uncover here, because sponsor gifts aren't random acts of kindness, they're a popularity metric. The more sympathetic your edit, the more relatable your backstory, the more the capital frames you as someone to root for, the more those little silver parachutes quietly tilt the odds. A salve for burns here, antibiotics there, a loaf of bread at exactly the moment you're starving. Each choice is small. The cumulative effect is massive. So why does that matter politically? Because once the capital has spent hours of screen time telling a story about you, killing you too early becomes a problem. If the whole capital has fallen in love with a tributes relationship, their courage, their tragic district backstory, suddenly eliminating them in the bloodbath feels less like punishment and more like betrayal. Snow does not want the audience feeling betrayed by the games. Think about Katniss and Peter. Their star-crossed lovers arc is a broadcast decision as much as a personal relationship. The cameras zoom in on hand-holding. The kisses are replayed. Caesar feeds them leading questions. The edit leans into romance because hope sells. But that part matters because the more the capital buys into their story, the more invested it is in seeing that story continue. When Seneca Crane introduces the rule change allowing 2 victors from the same district, he isn't just reacting to strategy in the arena, he's feeding a narrative his own broadcast has built. And once you've sold the country on a love story, watching one half die horribly, that's a riot risk. So in some years, the chosen victor might not be Snow's personal favorite at all. It might be the tribute the fandom has already crowned through screen time, memes, and obsession. Finnick Odair is the clearest example. Beautiful, charming, endlessly marketable. The capital turns him into a product because the audience already wants him. Which raises a darker question for the next section. When the cameras love you that much, are you safer or even more trapped? Book versus movie. Which manipulations did the adaptation highlight or hide? So when the cameras adore you, are you safer or more trapped? The answer changes a lot depending on whether you're reading the books or watching the movies, because the films do something the books almost never do. They take you straight into the control room. We're going to cover why that shift matters. In the books, the games are mostly filtered through Katniss's senses: smoke, screams, cannon fire, but not the hand that lights the match. In the movies, you literally watch Gamemakers drag icons across a holographic arena, press buttons and spin dials to summon fire, fog, mutts, you name it. At face value, it's just cool sci-fi world building. But here's the real question. Does seeing the machinery make the games feel more rigged or less? On the page, manipulation is an invisible force. Katniss hears the anthem. Here's Claudius Templesmith's rule change about 2 victors from the same district, and she has to guess why. She doesn't know Seneca Crane has pitched this as reactive drama to keep ratings high. She doesn't see a meeting where Snow reminds him, "A little hope is effective." The relationship between decision and outcome is murky on purpose, which makes the capital feel huge, abstract, and terrifying. In the film, that same moment is literal. We cut to Seneca, framed as a star producer, confidently approving the 2 from the same district twist. We see the arena hologram update. Suddenly, Katniss and Peter's miracle isn't just survival, it's a programming choice. That part matters because it nudges you toward the idea that certain wins are allowed if they serve the narrative. This is where we talk about Seneca himself. The books barely sketch him in. He's a name, a beard, and then a cautionary tale. The movies, though, linger on that beard, those tailored suits, his quiet panic when Snow warns him about too much hope. By turning a faceless institution into a single anxious showrunner, the adaptation personalizes control. It's not just the capital anymore. It's this one man choosing which tribute gets a firewall and which one gets a fruit basket. The mutts are another huge tell. In the first book, Katniss realizes, far too late, that the wolf mutts carry eerie echoes of the dead tributes. It's horrifying precisely because she pieces it together in the arena, with almost no confirmation. In the movie, we watch the design process. DNA pulled up on screens, creatures rendered in 3D, then dropped in. The same thing happens in Catching Fire. With the Jabberjays and the poison fog, Gamemakers literally drag hazards onto the map. So which version makes the games feel more engineered? The books imply long-term political rigging. Snow's choice to send peacemakers, to bomb District 12, to re-reap victors in the Quarterquell. The films emphasize real-time spectacle management. Turn the dial, spike the ratings, punish a tribute who's off script. One leans on subtext, the other on glowing control panels. Both, though, quietly support the idea of allowed wins. The novels do it by showing you the aftermath, how victors are used as propaganda. The movies do it by showing you the moment of selection, who gets saved, who gets cornered. But if the adaptation gives you the control room, what happens when we start treating each famous victor as a specific production decision? That's where things get uncomfortable in the next part. Pattern break. Let's imagine a fully rigged games from Snow's POV. Instead of watching the games from the outside, step into the rose-scented study. You're not a tribute. You're Snow planning a Hunger Games where the victor is chosen before a single name is pulled. If the games are really a message, what happens when you write the ending first? Here's the real question. What does Snow actually want out of a perfect year? He doesn't care who's strongest. He cares who's useful. He wants to reward a loyal district that's been behaving after some quiet unrest. He wants a marketable victor the capital can turn into perfume ads and interview reels. He wants to avoid another Katniss-style martyr, and he wants a clear warning aimed at a recently rebellious region without admitting that's what he's doing. So the plan starts before the arena. You tilt the reapings, maybe not by rigging the balls on camera, but by quietly encouraging a specific career academy to send their best. You promise their mayor extra grain shipments if their tribute performs. That part matters because it keeps the relationship transactional, not sentimental. The district isn't loved, it's bought. Then you design the arena as a gift-wrapped weapon. Your chosen tribute is a swimmer? Suddenly we're in a chain of tropical islands, broken up by open water and coral mazes. At face value, it's variety for the audience. In practice, it's a death sentence for landlocked kids from a mining district. Food sources cluster near the reefs. The safest shelters are on tiny sandbars that require strong swimming to reach before nightfall. Hazards become selective, mutts that hunt by scent, unleashed downwind of the tribute with the most sponsors, never toward your favorite. A sudden storm, timed for the exact hour when two dangerous rivals are crossing a ravine. You don't have to drop a lightning bolt on the chosen victor's head, when you can just move the storm 10 minutes. And this is where we talk about heroism as a production choice. You script moments. A medicine parachute arrives just in time for your tribute to save a weaker ally. A feast is announced at a location that plays to their skills. Camera angles linger when they hesitate before killing, then cut away fast when they do something brutal. The edit builds a story: reluctant killer, loyal friend, tragic survivor. Sponsor segments lean hard on a sympathetic backstory, maybe a dead sibling, maybe a promise to rebuild their district's school. On television, the capital sells you hope, not odds. Interviewers frame every question to make this tribute sound inevitable. Other deaths are quick montages. Their kills get swelling music. There is a lot to uncover here about how you can rig a victor without ever changing a rule on paper. So when we look back at canon games, which years feel suspiciously close to this template? Finnick's Ocean Arena, Johanna's tree-filled slaughterhouse. Even Katniss's berry stunt only works because a mid-game rule change suddenly favors District 12. If Snow could imagine this fully controlled version, how many times did he almost get there without us noticing? And more unsettling, how many of our favorite wins only exist because the capital decided they were safe enough to allow? So let's actually rank this nightmare. If the capital can nudge the board whenever it wants, which victors look the most allowed to win? And here's the real question. When you put them side by side, does Katniss even top that list? We're going to cover 6 names using a quick scorecard: political usefulness, marketability, ease of control, and clear arena bias. Nobody is a pure puppet. Nobody is a pure underdog miracle. But when you track where the game's bent instead of broke, patterns start to show up. At the top, it has to be Finnick. On paper, he's the perfect capital asset. Young, gorgeous, lethal in a crowd-pleasing way. His Ocean Arena is practically a Finnick commercial. Tridents, water, a setting that flatters a District 4 career tribute trained since childhood. At face value, it's fair because everyone shares the same beach. In practice, the environment is tailored to make his existing advantages explode. Then, post-games, he becomes a product. The escort circuit, the coerced prostitution, the image of the charming victor the capital can sell to every district as proof the games can bless you. Right under him, Johanna, her forest arena is a tree-filled slaughterhouse, which sounds neutral until you remember District 7 is lumber. She knows trees, she knows axes, she can weaponize the vertical space in a way a fishing kid from 4 or a mining kid from 12 simply can't. The capital gets a vicious, angry, but visually striking victor who can be paraded as proof that even a rough district can produce stars. That part matters because it keeps hope alive in places that should be the most rebellious. Third, BT, politically he's gold. A brainy victor from a tech district reinforces the promise that innovation is rewarded. His arena? Wired with power, literally. The force field, the lightning tree, the way traps and tech become central, this is where we talk about how the games quietly reward the skills the capital already exploits in its factories and weapons labs. Haymitch sits in the messy middle. His force field trick is absolutely earned, but the arena design makes that discovery disproportionately powerful. One cliff edge, one invisible wall, and suddenly one clever tribute can flip the table. The capital clearly didn't intend that. Their rage afterward proves it. Still, they built the toy he used to beat them. Then Katniss and Peter. You could argue their shared win is the most blatant allowed moment, a mid-game rule change that just happens to favor a star-crossed pair from a backwater district the capital wants to pacify. But the berry gambit forces their hand. It's tolerance under duress, not a long-term investment. They become politically useful only after they've already broken the script. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Every one of these wins is both earned and to some degree tolerated. You can't draw a clean line between given and deserved when the arena itself is the capital's hand on the scale. So where would you put the unseen victors? The quiet District 5 kid who hacked a power grid? Or the District 2 career who fit the propaganda poster a little too well? Take this framework, usefulness, marketability, control, bias, and start scoring. Because in the next part, we're going to ask an even harder question. What happens when the capital decides a victor it once allowed has suddenly become too dangerous to live? The ones who never had a chance, tributes the capital would never let win. So if some tributes are quietly being nudged towards victory, here's the real question. Who are the ones the capital will never ever let walk out of that arena alive? This is where we talk about the truly unacceptable tributes. Not the loudmouths on Caesar's couch, but the ones whose very existence is a threat. Open rebellion simmering under the surface. Natural leadership that pulls people into orbit. Or deep ties to resistance networks the capital already fears. You're not just dangerous with a weapon, you're dangerous with an idea. At face value, the games promise a neutral test of survival. May the odds be ever in your favor. All that branding. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the moment a tribute starts to represent hope instead of fear, the relationship between them and the capital flips. Suddenly, a win isn't a spectacle, it's a spark. Think about Rue. On paper, she's a non-threat, tiny, unarmed, from Agricultural District 11. In practice, she forms a cross-district alliance with Katniss, uses the Mockingjay signal, and turns the arena into a communication network. That part matters because it shows she's not just surviving, she's coordinating. A living Rue going home to orchards full of restless workers? That's a folk hero the capital can't control. Thresh is another. He refuses to play by the expected script. No career alliance, no pandering to cameras, just raw power and a strict personal code. He spares Katniss over Rue, asserting his own justice system inside the games. You can feel Snow's blood pressure spike. A tribute who can kill careers but still chooses mercy. That's leadership potential. And it's not just named characters. You see flashes everywhere, tributes who share food instead of hoarding it, who refuse to finish off the wounded, who lock eyes with the cameras in open defiance. The unnamed girl who starts a song in the training center, the boy who pulls a rival out of a flood instead of letting him drown. None of them fit the capital's preferred narrative of selfish brutality. So how do you erase those threats without breaking the illusion of fairness? You don't send a peacekeeper into the arena. You send mutts. You trigger random forest fires, unpredictable floods, unfortunate pack attacks. You engineer showpiece confrontations where the rebel-leaning tribute just happens to be outnumbered, outgunned, and conveniently cornered for maximum ratings. We're going to cover the mechanics more later, but the key is subtlety. A well-timed tracker jack a nest near the wrong camp. A feast at the cornucopia that lures specific tributes into a kill box. A rule change that suddenly makes their alliance illegal, forcing them into betrayals that get them killed. Anyway, once you see this category, the games stop looking neutral at all. They're not a meritocracy of violence. They're a curated story with hard political red lines. Some tributes are allowed to surprise the capital, others are never more than temporary characters. And here's the chilling part. For those tributes, the decision is made the second their name is read. No matter how clever they are, no matter how many sponsors they win, the capital has already slotted them into the role of inspirational corpse. So what happens when one of those unacceptable tributes survives anyway? Did Katniss ever truly beat the game, or just change its rules? So what happens when one of those unacceptable tributes survives anyway? You get Katniss Everdeen. On paper, she's the glitch in the system. Survives the 74th games, survives the 75th, sort of, and then walks out the other side as the Mockingjay, the face of a full-scale rebellion. It sounds like she beat the games 3 times in a row, but here's the real question. Did she actually outplay the capital, or did she just force everyone to rewrite the script around her? In the 74th, her victories look personal. She outshoots, outthinks, outsurvives. Yet the single biggest turning point isn't her skill, it's a rule change. Seneca Crane suddenly allows 2 victors from the same district. At face value, that feels merciful, even romantic. The star-crossed lovers of District 12 get a shot at a shared ending. But that part matters because the Gamemakers chose that exact rule at that exact moment to turn Katniss and Peter into a better story. A higher rating story. A hopeful story Snow can control. They don't save her because she's untouchable. They save her because she's useful. The irony is that she then weaponizes the usefulness. When she and Peter threaten double suicide, she flips the capital's own promise of hope into a hostage situation. Either they both win, or there's no victor at all. She's still inside the narrative box. She just kicks the walls hard enough that the audience sees the cracks. This is where we talk about the second round, the 75th. On the surface, the quarter quell is the capital yanking back control, using the pool of existing victors to eliminate a problem. But once again, the system bends around Katniss. Plutarch and the rebels design the arena as a clock, rig the force field, and quietly decide she is the one who must live so the rebellion has a symbol. The lightning tree, Beatty's wire, the hovercraft extraction, those are just as engineered as any mutation. She isn't just surviving the games, she's being routed through them. By the time we reach District 13, the tools haven't changed. Only the hands holding them have. We're going to cover this more later, but you already see the pattern. Media crews, carefully staged propo shoots, Cressida framing Katniss against ruins and roses. The rebellion takes the capital's relationship between spectacle and control and runs its own version of a rigged narrative. Instead of, this is what happens if you rebel, it becomes, this is what happens if you follow Katniss. So does she ever stop being a chosen victor, or does she just get drafted by a different side, with different goals? There is a lot to uncover here, because even her biggest win, assassinating Coin instead of Snow, gets instantly converted into another story about hope and fear. The girl who broke the games becomes the cautionary tale and the legend simultaneously. Statues, songs, history lessons. She ends the arena, but she never really steps off the stage. And if every side keeps needing a face, a symbol, a victor, what does that say about the world that comes after the games? What this means for how we watch the games, and the story. So where does that leave you, the person turning the pages or watching the screen, every time a cannon doesn't fire for your favorite? If Katniss never really steps off the stage, then here's the real question. Do any of the victors? When you start seeing wins as allowed instead of pure clean triumphs, it doesn't erase what those tributes did. Katniss still outshoots careers. Beatty still rewires the arena. Haymitch still weaponizes a force field nobody else noticed. The skill is real. The suffering is real. But there is a lot to uncover here, because now every clever move doubles as something the Capitol either tolerated or chose not to crush. That part matters because it makes every victory feel rigged in a different way. Not rigged so the tribute doesn't earn it, but rigged so the story around them serves a purpose. Finnick's charm becomes a survival curse. At face value, he's the golden boy of District 4, adored by the Capitol for his beauty and talent. Under this lens, you realize that the very traits that helped him win are the ones the Capitol then monetizes, weaponizing his body and his image for years. His reward is just a longer sentence. Same with Haymitch. You watch his bitterness and alcoholism, and maybe, the first time through, you treat it as background color. But imagine winning in a way that embarrasses the Gamemakers, only to realize they let you live because your brokenness is useful. He becomes a living warning to every district. Even the clever victor ends up alone in a decaying house, mentoring children to die. Suddenly his relationship to the games makes a lot more sense. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. When you cheer for Katniss's rule change in the 74th Games, when you fist pump at Peter and Katniss both surviving, you're reacting the way Capitol citizens react to their favorites. You pick a victor, you root for outcomes, you argue over who deserved to win. The whole time, the Gamemakers are pulling levers off screen, deciding which narratives are allowed to continue. This is where we talk about us. Why does Collins make the arena so televisual, so bingeable? Because we, as readers and viewers, are implicated. We criticize the Capitol for loving the spectacle, but we also want the suspense, the twists, the last-second rescues. We want the hope of a survivor, so if the Capitol can quietly decide who gets a parachute, who gets a mutt, who gets a miracle rule change, what does that say about power and media in our own world? Who chooses which stories win? Which faces become symbols? Which tragedies get airtime? Which rebellions get edited into something inspirational and safe? As we move toward the end of the trilogy, we're going to cover how that same machinery keeps running even after the arenas fall, and why stepping off the stage might be harder than ending the games themselves. Recap. So, did the Capitol ever let a tribute win on purpose? So where does that leave us with the original question, did the Capitol ever let a tribute win on purpose? Or are we just reading conspiracy into a brutal sport? Because once you've seen how they choose which stories win, it's hard to pretend the arena is some neutral battlefield. At face value, the games promise fairness. 24 in, 1 victor out. May the odds be ever in your favor. But here's the real question. Who controls the odds? The answer we've been circling is that the Capitol doesn't handpick every single winner like a rigged lottery, but it absolutely shapes who's allowed to survive through arena design, media framing, and political calculus. This is where we talk about those 3 categories we've been building. First, the genuinely outplayed wins, tributes who really do beat the system, but only inside the narrow lanes the system allows. Haymitch is the clearest example. The force field was technically there for everyone, but the way his Quell arena was designed meant that one clever realization could flip the entire board. The Capitol didn't intend that. They punished him for it afterward. But they also broadcast it, turned his defiance into a cautionary spectacle, and then locked him into a lifetime of mentoring as payback. Then we have the quietly favored victors. the ones the capital doesn't save outright, but cushions on the way down. Finnick's win sits here, a beautiful, charismatic tribute from a career district who becomes a marketable face of the games. There is a lot to uncover here about why sponsors pour gifts into that narrative. His survival is skill plus arena design, plus a capital that immediately commodifies him, turning him into a product they can sell back to every district as hope and distraction. Johanna is almost the tragic mirror. The capital reads her defiance as spicy, not dangerous, until it is. She wins by being underestimated, by playing the angry girl who can be contained. That part matters because once Snow realizes she won't bend into the role of grateful victor, her games never really end. The torture and reaping in the quarter quell show how fast allowed to win can turn into scheduled for removal. And then Katniss and Peter, the lovers from 12, on paper, they're the miracle exception. In practice, they're the clearest case of the capital stepping back just enough. Seneca's mid-game rule change, the way the cameras fixate on their relationship, the sponsors rewarding every kiss, those are structural hands on the scale. The capital thinks it's engineering a ratings boost and a controllable symbol. Instead, it greenlights a story it can't put back in the box. So, did the capital ever let a tribute win on purpose? Not in a benevolent way, more in a "we'll tolerate this victor as long as they serve a function" way. In Panem, even survival is political. Victory isn't freedom, it's a different kind of captivity, with better furniture and worse obligations. And that's the discomfort you're supposed to sit with. You root for these victors, you love their wins, and you know those wins are tainted. The question is, what happens when the victors themselves start refusing the roles those wins were written for? Your turn in the arena. Which victor feels the most chosen to you? So now it's your turn in the arena, not with a bow or a trident, but with a theory. We've laid out how Victor's Village, the mentoring system, and the capital's total control of the arena create this pipeline where some tributes aren't just winning the games, they're being permitted to win. So here's the real question. Which victor suddenly feels the most chosen to you now that you've seen how deep that relationship between power and survival really goes? Is it Finnick, groomed into the capital's favorite from a tiny fishing district, turned into a product the second he steps off the train? Do you look at those sponsors, that trident, that perfect beach arena, and think, okay, somebody in the capital marketing department was very invested in this outcome? Or is it Katniss and Peter, whose miracle double victory only exists because Seneca flips a rule mid-game and then flips it back when it's politically convenient? Drop your victor in the comments and walk us through your reasoning using the criteria we've been building. Where did the arena design quietly favor them? What rule change, MUT placement, or sponsor flood suddenly makes more sense if you assume the capital wasn't neutral? There is a lot to uncover here when you stop treating the games as sport and start treating them as a rigged broadcast with a message. But this is where we talk about pushback too. Maybe you're sitting there ready to defend your favorite. Maybe you think Joanna really did just outplay the system with raw rage and an axe, or that BT's win was pure intellect, not a capital-approved narrative about innovation. Tell us which tributes you believe actually beat the board with minimal interference, and why you trust their victory more than others. Pattern interrupt for you. If Snow could rig a reaping, why wouldn't he rig a winner? We already accept that names in those glass bowls aren't sacred, so why would the final canon be? Which district do you think has the most quietly engineered victors over time? District 1 with its perfect aspirational careers? Or somewhere poorer where a sudden win feels suspiciously timed to calm unrest? At face value, a victor is just the last person standing. But that part matters because once you remember the game makers control weather, mutts, food, and terrain in real time, last person standing turns into last person they allowed to stand. Your theories help map where that invisible hand is heaviest. If you're into this kind of deep dive into Panem's power structures, how hope is manufactured, how districts are managed through promise and punishment, check out our other breakdowns on quarter quells, reaping math and capital propaganda, and consider sticking around for more. Because as long as there are victors, the games never really end. And as long as the games never end, neither does the analysis we're going to cover next. Bonus thought: how many secret deals are hiding off page? So if the games never really end, here's the real question. What else is still happening that we never see? At face value, you watch a Hunger Games and it looks brutally simple. 24 tributes go in, one victor comes out, the arena does the rest. But if the capital can change the weather, drop mutts on command, and rewrite the rules mid-broadcast, do you really think all the bargaining stops once the train leaves the station? Or is that where the real negotiations begin? This is where we talk about the off-page games. The ones happening in phone calls, private trains, and quiet corners of the training center. You have mentors who know how the system works, stylists with direct relationships to high-paying sponsors, district officials desperate for a win. Are we supposed to believe none of them ever hint, threaten, or beg for special treatment? A better care package, a slower mutt attack, a conveniently timed rainstorm when their tribute is dying of thirst. There is a lot to uncover here. Think about Finnick. The capital turns him into a commodity the second he wins. That part matters because it tells you the games are also a casting call. If you're marketable enough, pretty enough, politically useful enough, why wouldn't a stylist lean on a sponsor or a head peacekeeper to keep you alive one more night? Not to rig the games completely, but to tilt the board. And over all of that, you have Snow. He tells Seneca Crane that hope is more powerful than the fear. So what's more hopeful than the unspoken promise that if you play along, you might be spared? You can imagine indirect offers reaching tributes long before the arena, mentorship sessions that suddenly turn into warnings, capital handlers suggesting very gently that obedience now could mean mercy later. Not a contract on paper, a relationship built on implication. So what happens when someone refuses that script? Picture a politically inconvenient tribute who won't smile, won't sell the romance, won't praise the capital in interviews. Maybe they're brave enough or reckless enough to turn down the quiet deal. Suddenly, the arena's random hazards stop feeling random. The feast is placed just where they're weakest. The weather shifts against their district's skill set. A mutt attack arrives 30 seconds earlier than it needed to. You never hear an announcer say, "And now we punish disobedience." They don't have to. The arena just becomes a little more hostile and the audience shrugs it off as bad luck. And here's the twist. Even if no explicit deal is ever made, the possibility that it could be is enough to stain every victory. You can never fully prove your favorite victor wasn't quietly protected or quietly targeted. That uncertainty is part of the capital's power. So when you rewatch or reread, pay attention to the throwaway lines. Who gets mysterious sponsor gifts at perfect moments? Who survives a mutt attack that should have killed them? Who the cameras linger on just a little too long? Because hidden in those details might be the shadow of a negotiation you were never meant to see. And once you start seeing those, another question opens up. What happens to a system when the secret deals stop working? Final exit from the arena. Why we keep coming back to these games. When you start pulling on those secret deals, it's hard to stop. Because here's the real question. Why are we so obsessed with figuring out if a win was pure skill or quietly approved by the capital? It's not just trivia. You're not replaying Haymitch's force field trick or Finnick's suspiciously perfect sponsor gifts just to win a fandom argument. You're testing the borders of power. You're asking, In a world where the games control the weather, the mutts, the feast, how much room is there for a tribute to actually win on their own terms? And once you ask that about Panem, it's very hard not to ask it about us. Because at face value, the Hunger Games is about kids in an arena. But there is a lot to uncover here. Manufactured victors in Panem map a little too neatly onto manufactured winners in our world. Who gets the promotion, the award, the viral moment, the "you made it" narrative? Is it always the most talented, or the person whose story is easiest to sell, safest to elevate, most useful to the system that's already in charge? That part matters because the capital doesn't just crown a victor, it frames a story. Finnick isn't just a champion, he's a commodity. Johanna isn't just a survivor, she's a cautionary tale. Katniss and Peter aren't just District 12 kids who outsmarted the arena. They're turned into a romance brand and then into a threat that has to be contained. Once you see that relationship between power and narrative in the games, you start noticing every time our own media turns a person into a symbol and then punishes them for stepping off script. So this is where we talk about why we keep returning to these books and films years later. We're going to cover arenas, rule changes, tiny production design choices in Victor's Village, and somehow we end up talking about propaganda, trauma, and meritocracy. The reason is simple. The Hunger Games invites you to live in the grey. Winning is never just winning. Survival is never just survival. Every miracle has a camera angle and a sponsor behind it. And that's the space this channel wants to stay in with you, not just recapping who threw which spear in which year, but asking why Snow builds a mansion on a hill, why a single rule change can rewrite an entire district's sense of hope, why a victor's promise of safety is always conditional. We're interested in the messy overlap where politics, character, and world building collide and refuse to sort themselves out neatly. So if you want to keep walking through this Victor's Village of analysis, there's another deep dive waiting for you on screen, whether it's the next arena breakdown or a closer look at how the capital sells hope as a product. Because in a world where the capital can always tilt the odds, the real question isn't who wins, it's who's allowed to.